All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do our educational videos over here, and we tend to focus on the subjects that you have to dig for, things that the powers that be don't want you to know about, but things that would really benefit you if you only knew. And so this is another one of our Bible decodes. I think this is number 409. And these are things that your priest or pastor, rabbi or minister doesn't want you to know and probably won't tell you if they knew, which they probably don't. And but if you are a truther, then you hopefully will not take no for an answer, and you will dig on your own and discover channels like this one. Now, we've examined a lot of the details about the Roman origins hypothesis on this channel in the previous 400 some videos. And that is that the true authors of the New Testament were the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars. That is Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian, who ruled Rome from 69 until 96 AD. They wrote the New Testament as a psychological operation against the Jews. The Jews had been a big headache for the Romans for over a century, ever since, and vice versa, ever since the Romans had occupied Judea um, in 63 BC. And it was a constant uprising, revolts, revolutions, and it culminated in an outright war um, starting in 66 AD. And this war saw a few self-proclaimed Jewish messiahs answer the call of, what Messiah was supposed to be for the Jews, a military commander who was going to deliver the Jews from the occupying power. And they literally kicked out the Roman puppet king there, Agrippa II, Herod Agrippa II, sent him back to Rome. Um, and that was a temporary victory for the Jews, but Emperor Nero then sent in General Vespasian to quell the revolt there in 66 AD. It took the Romans 7 years to accomplish a victory against the Jews, a devastating victory. And by that time, Vespasian was the new emperor, and his son Titus was in charge of the military. They both were wounded in the war, and they both had a vested interest in making sure that the Jews would not rise up again, despite their, decimated state. They knew that the Jews were terribly resilient and were coming back with more revolt. And so they decided to write a story. And this is totally in keeping with the way the Romans did things, psychological operations, and creating religions. They had created a number of religions during this time period. And so they took the idea of the Jewish Messiah and they twisted it to create a mythical story of a Jewish Messiah who was not a military commander, but instead was a prince of peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar and walking the extra mile and turning the other cheek. At the same time, this Jesus, who was deferential to the Romans, was very critical of the Jews. Anytime that Jesus gets ornery, he does it against the Jews, not against the Romans, such as overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers at the temple and berating the Jewish merchants selling small animals for sacrifice at the temple. And then as you proceed in the New Testament, you will see that Paul is even more pro Roman and anti Jew than Jesus was. This is the kind of thing that really wouldn't happen unless it was put upon them by the Romans. Um, but the more direct evidence of this is when you take a look at the work of Josephus. Josephus was a Roman historian. He's known as Flavius Josephus because he was an adopted member of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars. He was one of basically Titus's adopted brother. Even though he was of Jewish extraction and fought for the Jews in the war, he defected to the Romans. And somehow the Romans pardoned him and set him up at a townhouse at Caesar's palace and made him one of the court historians. This is a pretty tall tale that he tells in his autobiography. Um, I'm not quite sure whether I think that Josephus really existed or whether I think he was kind of like a think tank, an army of maybe a whole family or a few different families of Roman intellectuals who were members of the Roman court, the Flavian court, who all put their heads together to write the Gospels at this time, and then the rest of the New Testament in later years. Um, because the Gospels are, the New Testament in general is brimming with diversity. There is a lot of influences there from all over the place. Egypt, Greece, Rome, mystery schools, Persia, alchemy, astrology, shamanism, India, China, Japan, and of course, Judea, and many other sources all went into the formation of the Gospels. But it must be said that whatever is in the Gospels is not original. It is derivative of these other sources. There's nothing original in there. The only thing original in there is the psychological operation. All of the fraudulent stuff is original. All of the kind of the pious, righteous uh, stuff that you can um, be- believe in is borrowed from older sources. And we're looking at a book today from an author who documents a lot of this. His name is Kersey Graves, and he's got a book that he wrote back in 1876 that is called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christianity. And he documents a lot of these older sources and shows how these gospel writings are derivative of these older sources. And in this chapter, I believe this is chapter 32, um, he introduces the 346 parallel concepts between Christianity and Krishna, or between Jesus Christ and Krishna. Krishna was an Indian Messiah figure, or Son of God figure, who dates back to about 1200 BC. And he has finished introducing all of the 346 points. Now he's into some analysis of it and um, citing some secondary sources. So we'll start right here. Brahmanism, or Buddhism in some of its forms, is said to constitute the religion of considerably more than half the human race. It teaches the existence of one supreme, eternal, and uncreated God called Brahma, who created the world through Krishna, the second member of the Trinity. Paul says, God created the world through Jesus Christ, the second member of the Christian Trinity, in Ephesians 3. How striking the resemblance. The doctrine of the incarnation, the descent of the deity upon earth, and his manifestation in a human form for the redemption of mankind seems to have existed in the shape of prophecy uh, or fact in all ages of the world. Hinduism teaches 9 of these incarnations. Furthermore, it teaches the doctrine of the Trinity, the, the fall and redemption of man, and a state of future rewards and punishments in a future life. This religion in chief of Asia is traceable to remote ages. The doctrine of the Trinity is represented in the Elephantine Cavern and taught in the Mahabharata, which goes back for its origin nearly 2,000 years before Christ. Okay, that comes from the New York Sunday Dispatch of 1855. Now, this next passage looks like this is from a lecture before the Free Press Association in 1827. Not sure who this is from, however, but it says, in the year 3000, I guess that's 3000 BC, Krishna descended to the earth for the purpose of defeating the evil machinations of Shiva. As Christ came to destroy the devil and his works. After a fierce combat with the devil or serpent, he defeated him by bruising his head. He receiving during the contest a wound in the heel. He died at last between 2 thieves. He led a pure and holy life and was a meek, tender, and benevolent being, and enjoined charity, hospitality, and mercy, and forbade lying, prevarication, hypocrisy, and overreaching in dealing, and pilfering, and theft, and violence toward any being. Okay, here comes another quote. This is from Godfrey Higgins's Anacalypsis, which I think is from the late 1820s. The birthplace of the Hindu hero Krishna is called Mathura, which is easily changed and by correct translation becomes Mathuraya, the place where Christ is said to have stopped between Nazareth and Egypt. To show his humility, he washed the feet of the Brahmins, as Christ is said to have washed the feet of the Jews in John 13:14. One day, a woman came to him and anointed his hair with oil, in return for which he healed her maladies. One of his first miracles was that of healing a leper, like Christ in Mark 1:4. Finally, he was crucified, then descended to Hades. It is said of Christ that his soul was not left in hell in Acts 2:31. Krishna rose from the dead and descended to Vaikantha, or heaven. Now we ask, is it any wonder, in view of the foregoing historical exposition, that Eusebius should exclaim, quote, "The religion of Jesus Christ is neither new nor strange." And that comes from Eusebius's ecclesiastical history. He was a late third, early fourth century church father. He was in tight there with Constantine, the great emperor, who was kind of the popularizer of Christianity um, uh, in the Roman Empire. Truly, did Saint Augustine say, "This in our day is the Christian religion, not as having been unknown in former times, but having recently received that name." And Augustine came from a little bit later period, I think early 5th century. Here, then, we pause to ask our good Christian reader, where is your original Christianity now? Or what constitutes the revealed religion of Jesus Christ? Or where is the evidence that any new religion was revealed by him or preached by him, seeing we have all his religion as shown by the foregoing historical citations, included in an old heathen system more than 1,000 years old when Jesus Christ was born. We find it all here in this old Oriental system of Buddhism, every essential particle, and principle of it. We find Christianity all here, its Alpha and Omega, its beginning and end. We find it here in all its details, its root, essence, and entity, all its revealed doctrines, religious ideas, beautiful truths, senseless dogmas, and Oriental phantoms. Not a doctrine, principle, or precept of the Christian system, but that is here proclaimed to the world ages before. The angels announced the birth of a divine babe in Bethlehem. Will you then persist in claiming that truth, life, and immortality came by Jesus Christ, and that Christ came to preach a new gospel to the world and to set forth a new religion never before heard amongst men? When the historical facts cited in this work demonstrate 100 times over that such a position is palpably erroneous, will you still persist with all those undeniable facts staring you in the face, proving and reproving with overwhelming demonstration that the statement is untrue, in declaring that the religion of Jesus Christ is the only true and soul saving religion, and all other systems are mere straw, stubble, tradition, and superstition? When no mathematician ever demonstrated a scientific problem more clearly than we have proved in these pages that all the principal systems of the past, by no means accepting Christianity, are essentially alike in every important particular, all their cardinal doctrines being the same, differing only in unimportant details. Seeing, then, that all systems of religion have been found to be essentially alike in spirit and in practice, the all important question arises here: how is it to be accounted for? Perhaps some of our good Christian readers, unacquainted with history, may cherish the thought that all the Oriental systems brought to notice are but imitations of Christianity, that they were reconstructed out of materials obtained from that source, that Christianity is the parent and they the offspring. But alas, for their long cherished idol, those who entertain such forlorn hopes are sowing to the wind and are doomed to disappointment. With the exception of Mohammedanism alone, Christianity is the youngest system in the whole catalog. The historical facts prove this statement are voluminous. But as it needs no proof to those who have read religious history, but little space will be occupied with citations for this purpose. With respect to the antiquity of the principal Oriental system, we need only quote the testimony of Sir William Jones, a devout Christian writer who spent years in India and whose testimony will be accepted by any person acquainted with his history. He makes the emphatic declaration, quote, that the name of Krishna and the general outline of his history were long anterior to the birth of our Savior and probably to the time of Homer, about 8 or 900 BC. We know very certainly, no guesswork about it. We know very certainly. And being a scholar, a traveler, and a sojourner among the Hindus, and well versed in their history, no person ever had a better opportunity to know than he. We will hear this renowned author further. Quote, in the Sanskrit dictionary compiled more than 2,000 years ago, we have the whole history of the incarnate deity Krishna, born of a virgin and miraculously escaping in his infancy from the reigning tyrant of his country. He passed a life of the most extraordinary and incomprehensible devotion. His birth was concealed from the tyrant, to whom it had been predicted that one born at that time and in that family, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here, would destroy him, would destroy his power. This writer also states that the first Christian missionaries who entered India were astonished to find there a religion so near like their own, and could only account for it by supposing that the devil, foreseeing the advent of Christ, originated a system of religion in advance of his, and just like it. Stated in other words, he got out the second edition of the gospel plan of salvation before the first edition was published or had an existence. Rather a smart trick, this, thus to outwit God Almighty. Yeah, well, that's what you call mental illness, and that's what you call mental gymnastics. Christians tend to try to figure out how they can be the one and only and most important, uh, religion out there, by such mental gymnastics and mental illnesses. And the same goes for the Old Testament, where the stories in Genesis are mere poor copies of much, 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 much older stories. But nonetheless, the version in Genesis is accorded truth, whereas the stories that Genesis uh, originated from are seen to be myths or not true. Um, you know, um, this is a mental illness delusion. It's not maybe not a severe mental illness. It's not um, although um, it's not a minor mental illness. You know, it's not maybe as bad as um, thinking that a man can be a woman, but it comes pretty close to that because literally um, that that kind of thinking kind of enters into it in some places of the mythology. Okay, let's continue here. With respect to the vast antiquity of the Hindu Oriental religion, which indicates it as being not only the source from which the materials of the Christian religion were drawn, but as being the parent of all the leading systems, with their 3,000 subordinate branches, which existed at a much earlier period than Christianity, we need only point to the deep chiseled sculptures and imperishable monuments stamped on their time honored temples, tombs, altars, vases, columns, pagodas, ruined towers, etc., which, with contemporary inscriptions, warrant us in antedating the religions of the um, I think this word would be Himalayas, but I don't not familiar with this word. Himmaleyas. I think that would probably be Himalayas, maybe back in 1876. Far beyond the authentic records of any other religion that has floated down to us on the stream of time. The numerous images of their crucified gods, Krishna and Sakya, emblazoned on their old rock temples in various parts of the country, some of which are constructed of clay porphyry, now the very hardest species of rock, with their attendant inscriptions in a language so very ancient as to be lost to the memory of man, vie with the Sanskrit in age, the oldest deciphered language in the world, which I'm not sure that that's true anymore. But all these and 100 corroboratory historical facts fix on India as being the birthplace of the mother of all religions now existing, or that ever had in existence, while the great workshop in which they were subsequently remodeled was in Alexandria in Egypt, whose theological schools furnished the model for nearly every system now found noticed on the page of history, Christianity, of course, included. So much for the unrivaled antiquity of the Hindu religion. Now, the more important query arises: what relationship does ancient heathen or Hindu Buddhism bear to Christianity? What is the evidence that the latter is an outgrowth of the former? As an answer to this question, the reader will please note the following facts of history. Alexandria, the home of the world's great conqueror, was at one period of time the great focal center for religious specialization or speculation and propagandism, the great emporium for religious dogmas throughout the East, and place of resort for the disciples of nearly every system of religious faith then existing. And it must be pointed out that Alexandria, Egypt, was really like the second city of the Roman Empire, and many of the leading intellectuals and uh, scholars and royals of the Roman Empire resided in Alexandria, including Philo Judaeus and his family, the Alexanders. And many of them eventually resurfaced in Rome and participated in writing the Gospels. So um, his connection with Alexandria, I think, is on, but he may not make a connection directly with Rome. Okay, his second point is in this capital city, comprising about 500,000 inhabitants, were established a voluminous library and vast theological schools in which men of every religious order and of every phase of faith met and exchanged religious ideas and borrowed new doctrines with which they remodeled their uh, former systems of faith, amounting in some cases to an entire change of their long established creeds. And this is true of like Serapis, one kind of hybrid religion, which is a blending of some of the ancient Greek faiths along with some of the ancient Egyptian. Um, and so Alexandria was really kind of a factory of new religions and um, syncretism. Okay, number three, in these theological schools of the Jewish sect, which afterward became the founders of Christianity, were extensively represented. For, let it be noted, its first disciples and founders had all been Jews, probably of the Essene sect. We talked about that last week. The Essenes are, I believe, every bit as fictitious as the Christians or as Christ. They only really exist in the writings of ancient Roman uh, royals, Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Younger. For a long time, the Christians were but a Jewish sect, says M. Royce in History of Christian Theology. Um, Alexander the Great had, previous to this time, about 330 BC, subjected the whole of Western Asia to his dominions, including, of course, the Holy Land, Judea. By this act, a large portion of the Jewish nation were transferred from their own country to Alexandria, and this number was afterward vastly increased by Alexander's successor, Ptolemy Soter, who carried off and settled in that creedal city 100,000 more Jews. As a result, in part of these repeated calamities, the Lord's chosen people were literally broken up. They lost their law, lost their leader, their lawgiver, lost their language, lost the control of their country, the promised land, which they verily believed. The Lord had decided to them had ceded, had deeded to them in fee simple and ratified in the high court of heaven, and had declared they should hold and possess forever. And finally, they partially lost their nationality, being literally dissolved and broken up, and were finally almost lost to history, the 10 tribes disappearing entirely. The Jews had ever manifested a proneness for copying after the religious creations of the religious customs of their heathen neighbors and engrafting their doctrines into their own creeds, as their Bible history furnishes ample proof. In Alexandria, a very superior opportunity was afforded for doing this, excelling in this respect any previous period in their history. The shattered condition of their own religion, with all its conventional creeds, customs, and ceremonies, now suspended and literally prostrated, as above shown, vastly augmented the temptation ever rife with them to make another change in their religion and subject their creed to another installment of new doctrines by which it became Christianity. The liberal character and tolerant spirit of the political and religious institutions of the Kingdom of Alexandria, with its vast and attractive library of 200,000 volumes, established principally by Ptolemy Philadelphus, with other attractive features already pointed out, furnished great facilities as well as increased temptations to religious propagandists to absorb new theories and make new creeds out of the vast medley of religious doctrines and speculative dogmas preached and propagated in that royal city by the disciples and representatives of nearly every religious system then in existence, brought together by the attractions above specified. Um, I'm just trying to see how long he's going to go on and on and on and on here for. Looks like several more pages. So I think we're going to stop it off right there. And we will uh, return tomorrow and learn more about his, I think, thesis here that the Jews are kind of in a position to make a new religion in Alexandria, and they use these Krishna influences in order to do so. In He's close to being on track there, but he's kind of ignoring the role of the Romans, um, which you know people didn't really think in the language of conspiracy quite as much back in 1876, I would say, as they do now. So um, we'll stop right there. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute. And come back for tomorrow's episode of Bible Decode. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.